She went from Disney's princess to Disney's problem. And now, Rachel Zegler's future with the Mouse House might be hanging by a thread. In a shocking twist, the star of Disney's beleaguered Snow White remake has been summoned to an emergency legal showdown with the studio, facing accusations that could cost her everything, from her contract to her reputation. What went wrong? Who's really to blame? And is this the final nail in the coffin for Disney's most cursed reboot ever? Buckle up, because this story has drama, betrayal, political chaos, and a Hollywood fallout no one saw coming. She was supposed to be the next Disney icon, a new Snow White for a new generation. Young, brown-skinned, outspoken, a modern twist on a classic tale. And with a $240 million price tag, Disney wasn't just betting on Rachel Zegler. They were banking on her. This wasn't supposed to fail. It couldn't. Not after The Little Mermaid had already divided audiences. Not after the company's streaming losses had investors sweating. This was their Hail Mary, a revitalized Snow White, powered by Gen Z flair and political edge, set to redefine what a princess looks like. And then it all crumbled. Let's rewind to the beginning, before the controversies, before the TikTok clips, before the lawsuits. Back when this movie was being whispered about in studio boardrooms as Disney's next live-action titan. Think Beauty and the Beast numbers. Think billion-dollar box office. They had the formula, a beloved legacy character, a diverse casting choice to win headlines, and a musical pedigree that included Benj Pasek and Justin Paul, the same duo behind La La Land and The Greatest Showman. Oh, and did we mention Wonder Woman herself? Gal Gadot was playing the evil queen? On paper, it was flawless. Behind the scenes, executives were confident. Rachel Zegler, fresh off West Side Story, had just won a Golden Globe. Steven Spielberg had called her a generational talent. She was young, charismatic, politically active, and perfectly telegenic. The kind of starlet who could dominate red carpets, late-night interviews, and social media simultaneously. For Disney, she wasn't just Snow White. She was the future. But that future never came. Because before a single trailer dropped, the film started rotting from the inside out. First came the photos. Paparazzi images leaked from set showed a band of diverse companions that weren't dwarfs at all. They looked more like cosplay extras from a bad Renaissance fair. Social media erupted. Fans were confused. What exactly was this movie? Why was Disney rewriting one of its most iconic fairy tales? The studio's silence only made things worse. And then Rachel spoke. It started small. A few interview soundbites here and there. But with each promo clip, a new wave of backlash was born. She called the original Snow White weird. She mocked Prince Charming as a stalker. She said the film wouldn't be a love story anymore because, in her words, she doesn't need a man. Those lines, which might have sounded empowering in a boardroom pitch, detonated online like a landmine. Fans of the original were furious. Conservatives called it woke garbage. Progressives were split. And suddenly, Rachel Zegler wasn't Disney's sweetheart. She was their scapegoat. But the drama wasn't just online. It translated into something very real, very fast, dwindling interest. Early analytics from YouTube, TikTok, and Reddit showed a troubling pattern. Unlike previous Disney reboots, Snow White wasn't generating hype. It was generating hostility. Trailers were downvoted into oblivion. Comment sections turned into war zones. People weren't lining up to see Rachel Zegler's Snow White. They were lining up to roast her. And Disney felt it. Internally, alarm bells rang. The $240 million budget, already astronomical, now felt like a noose. The longer the film sat unreleased, the more expensive it became. Reshoots, PR cleanups, damage control meetings. Even the release date got pushed back again. Meanwhile, the conversation online had mutated into something much worse. Now it wasn't just about the movie. It was about Disney's brand. Was the company alienating its core audience? Had it strayed too far for nostalgia in its push for progressive reboots? Was Snow White about to become the studio's biggest box office bomb? Spoiler alert, it was. By the time Snow White finally hit screens, it was less of a debut and more of a disaster. The opening weekend was a bloodbath. Instead of the $100 million plus numbers Disney had once predicted, the film scraped by on fumes. Audience turnout was embarrassing. Theater chains started pulling screenings. International markets rejected it outright. And just like that, the fairy tale was over. From crown jewel to cautionary tale, Snow White now stands as one of the most spectacular collapses in Disney's modern history. A $240 million dream turned nightmare. And for Rachel Zegler, it was only the beginning of the storm. Because the worst? That was still to come. If the Snow White reboot was the iceberg, Rachel Zegler was the one steering the ship straight into it. At first, it was subtle. A few offhand comments during promo interviews. A sarcastic smirk here. An eye roll there. But soon, the world began to realize that the actress playing Disney's most innocent, sweet, and romantic heroine didn't seem to like her very much. Let's talk about the quote that started it all. The one that made even die-hard Disney fans stop and do a double take. In a press junket, Zegler shrugged and said, "The original cartoon came out in 1937, and very evidently so. There's a big focus on her love story with a guy who literally stalks her. Weird. Weird." The internet imploded. In one breath, she had dismissed one of the most iconic romances in animation history, one that had defined generations of childhoods, as stalking. A prince who kissed Snow White to save her life? Weird. A tale as old as time? Suddenly branded problematic. And it didn't stop there. In another interview, she said, she's not going to be saved by the prince, and she's not going to be dreaming about true love. She's dreaming about becoming the leader she knows she can be. It was meant to sound empowering, but instead it came off cold, detached, almost hostile, not just toward the original character, but toward anyone who had ever loved that character. Because here's the thing, it wasn't what she said. It was how she said it. There was no reverence, no wink to the audience, no sense of we're updating the past, but we still honor it. Instead, Zegler's tone felt superior, like she was above the fairy tale, above the fans, above the entire legacy. And people noticed. Side-by-side compilations began circulating online. Clips of Rachel dismissing Snow White were immediately followed by throwbacks of Lily James talking about the magic of Cinderella, or Emma Watson glowing about the timeless beauty of Beauty and the Beast. Halle Bailey, who also faced massive backlash for her casting in The Little Mermaid, still spoke with warmth and respect for Ariel's original story. She called her a dream character. She cried watching the original as a child. She knew what she was stepping into and treated it like an honor. Zegler, she sounded like she was doing Disney a favor. And that's where the real backlash began. Social media turned on her with lightning speed. TikTok edits painted her as the anti-princess. Reddit threads dissected every frame of her interviews, every eyebrow raise, every smirk. Twitter, or X, was even more brutal. She was labeled arrogant, ungrateful, out of touch. One viral tweet read, "How do you land the role of Snow White?" And then go on a year-long campaign to convince the world she sucks. The comments kept piling up. Every time she opened her mouth, it was like throwing gasoline on a fire. Even apolitical audiences, people who didn't care about wokeness or identity politics, started feeling the same fatigue. Not because Rachel Zegler was different, but because she seemed proud of scorning what made Snow White beloved in the first place. And the PR damage was irreversible. Instead of playing the role of a charming, modern princess, Zegler came off more like a bitter Gen Z iconoclast. Too cool to play along, too cynical to smile, and too jaded to fake the fantasy. Her interviews stopped feeling like promotion and started feeling like protests. It didn't help that she doubled down. Even as backlash mounted, she stuck to the script. No apologies, no clarifications, just more TikTok-style sarcasm, more quippy sound bites, and more thinly veiled contempt for the legacy she was being paid, handsomely, to embody. And while the internet mocked her, Disney squirmed in silence. Because now they weren't just losing money, they were losing goodwill. For the first time, audiences were rooting against one of their own princesses. Not because she looked different, not because the story was modernized, but because Rachel Zegler refused to play the part, both on and off screen. In an age where public perception is currency, Zegler's media tour was a masterclass in how to bankrupt it. She was supposed to be the heir to the Disney princess throne. Instead, she became a symbol of what happens when the crown slips and the mask comes off. While the internet was melting down over Rachel Zegler's comments, something much bigger and much quieter was happening behind the scenes. An emergency meeting, high-level executives, lawyers, Disney's top brass, and one urgent question on everyone's mind. What do we do about Rachel? Multiple insiders have now confirmed that following the viral backlash to Zegler's media appearances, Disney Legal was forced to step in. Not with a PR cleanup, not with damage control, but with crisis response. According to one source, it wasn't just a PR issue anymore. It had become a potential legal and contractual nightmare. And it all started with her interviews. Because when Zegler began criticizing the very foundation of Snow White, calling the prince weird, mocking the original plot, and seemingly dismissing Disney's most iconic princess, alarm bells started ringing. Not just in the press room, but in the legal department. Here's the thing. Zegler, like all Disney leads, would have signed an airtight contract. One that included morality clauses, brand partnership obligations, and clear expectations for public conduct, especially during press tours. And those contracts are serious. We're talking about billion-dollar intellectual property, characters with merchandising rights, ride integrations, theme park appearances, and decades of legacy. So when a lead actress is out there dragging the original film through the mud, that's not just a PR headache. That's brand sabotage. Insiders say Disney's legal team was furious. Not just because of what she said, but because she kept saying it. Interview after interview, the backlash grew, and so did internal panic. One executive reportedly called it a slow-motion car, the crash we couldn't stop. And that's when the emergency legal summit was called. According to leaked accounts, the meeting included representatives from legal, marketing, and executive production. It was closed door, confidential, phones off. But what we do know is that three major concerns were raised during that meeting. 1. Contract violations. Disney allegedly reviewed whether Zegler's comments violated her promotional obligations, specifically clauses requiring her to promote the project in a positive and brand-aligned manner. Her repeated mockery of the original Snow White and the prince could be interpreted as direct violations. This could have triggered a breach of contract clause, one that would allow Disney to reduce payouts or even pursue damages. 2. Brand damage. The legal team had to assess not just Zegler's comments, but their ripple effect. The merchandise forecast reportedly took a hit. Theme park departments were already panicking about how to present a character that audiences were turning against. And internally, brand confidence in the reboot was shattered. What was once pitched as a modern feminist reinvention was now seen as a hostile takeover, and the damage was incalculable. 3. Lawsuit risk. Here's where things get murky. Rumors began swirling that Disney was exploring its options for legal recourse if the movie flopped, and they could trace the flop directly to Zegler's comments. While suing your lead actress is rare, the option was reportedly floated. Why? Because in the age of social media, the court of public opinion hits the balance sheet. And Zegler's antagonistic media tour might have cost Disney hundreds of millions in potential returns. One insider put it bluntly. She didn't just tank the movie. She potentially nuked the entire brand. And make no mistake, this wasn't just a Rachel Zegler problem. This was a corporate crisis. Because for the first time, Disney was grappling with a face of the brand who was actively disowning the brand. So what came out of that emergency meeting? Silence. Strategized silence. Suddenly, Zegler disappeared from the promo circuit. The tone of Disney's official press releases shifted. Mentions of the film grew vague, buried, delayed. New footage was quietly shelved. Merch was paused, and a noticeable distance grew between Disney and its star, like a studio quietly trying to wash its hands. But legally, the damage had already been done. There are now whispers, unconfirmed but persistent, that Disney considered recasting Snow White entirely if the film's release got delayed again. Another rumor claims Zegler was asked to issue a public apology, one she allegedly refused to give. And while no lawsuit has officially been filed, The mere fact that it was discussed sends a chilling message. This wasn't just about a bad press tour. This was about protecting a billion-dollar brand from its own star. And in Hollywood, that's the kind of betrayal that leaves scars. Deep ones, legal ones, legacy ones. Because once upon a time, Rachel Zegler was supposed to lead Disney into a new era of empowered princesses. Now, she's become a cautionary tale whispered in studio backrooms, a reminder of how quickly a fairy tale can turn into a legal thriller. Just when Disney thought it couldn't get any worse, it did. The backlash over Rachel Zegler's interviews was already a PR wildfire. Executives were scrambling, legal was circling the wagons, and insiders whispered about re-edits, reshoots, even recasts. But then came a tweet. One tweet. 3 words. Free Palestine. It was posted casually, almost quietly, immediately after a promotional post for Snow White. And in that moment, everything changed. Let's break it down. The tweet wasn't just political. It was explosive. A nuclear fuse in an already burning house. Because in the entertainment world, certain topics are considered radioactive, and the Israel-Palestine conflict sits at the top of that list. It's divisive. It's global. And for studios with international stakeholders, theme parks in multiple countries, and billion-dollar streaming platforms to protect, it's a nightmare. Zegler's tweet wasn't a campaign. It wasn't carefully worded. It was raw, direct, unapologetic, and, crucially, timed just minutes after Disney had rolled out a major promotional push for Snow White on social media. And that's what triggered the studio-wide meltdown. Sources say the call came in within minutes. Publicists, legal, Disney International, the C-suite. Panic rippled through every division. Why? Because the tweet wasn't vetted, wasn't cleared, wasn't coordinated with the studio's global communication strategy. In fact, it directly contradicted it. And with tensions in the Middle East escalating by the hour, Disney was caught in an impossible position. Support her and risk alienating partners in Israel. Silence her and risk alienating progressive audiences in the U.S. Ignore it and risk everyone turning on them. The studio did what studios always do when caught between impossible options. They panicked. According to insiders, a high-level crisis meeting was called that night. But this wasn't just any meeting. Mark Platt, Hollywood legend, longtime collaborator with Disney, and one of the film's executive producers, was reportedly flown out to New York within hours. Not Zoom, not phone, in person. Why? Because Rachel was in Manhattan, and the situation required a face-to-face. This was no longer about interviews or contracts. This was about damage containment at the highest level. One source close to the production said, it stopped being about Snow White. It became a geopolitical problem. That's not something Disney is equipped to deal with. Mark Platt's mission? Convince Rachel to delete the tweet, or walk it back, or at the very least, go quiet. But Zegler didn't budge. According to one report, she felt strongly that her platform shouldn't be policed for politics. She believed she had a moral obligation to speak up. And while many praised her conviction, it left Disney cornered. Executives were already divided over her behavior. Some believed she was brave. Others believed she was reckless. But after the tweet, even her defenders began to question whether she could continue representing the brand. Because this wasn't just controversy. It was contagious. Within 24 hours, multiple pro-Israel groups condemned the tweet and threatened to protest Disney premieres. Hashtags began trending calling for a boycott of Snow White. Influencers started dissecting Disney's response, or lack thereof. Middle East partners started calling. Worried, hesitant. Some allegedly considered pulling promotions. And through it all, Rachel stayed silent. No apology, no clarification, no deletion. Just silence. Insiders say this was the moment internal tensions finally snapped. Marketing wanted her pulled from future interviews. Legal wanted out, clauses reviewed. Merchandising paused, future rollouts. International PR teams refused to include her in regional campaigns. She was still the face of the movie, on paper. But within the studio, she had become a ghost. And here's the dark irony. Just months earlier, Zegler had been hailed as Disney's future. A new kind of princess. Bold, fierce, unapologetic. But now, the studio saw her as a liability they couldn't afford and couldn't escape. Because contracts were signed, the movie was shot, and release day was looming. So what did Disney do? They issued nothing. No statement. No comment. Not even a whisper. They went radio silent, hoping, praying that the fire would burn itself out, that audiences would forget, that the next news cycle would wash it all away. But the internet doesn't forget, and neither do investors, nor international stakeholders, and certainly not fans on either side of a global conflict. One tweet had tipped the scales. One tweet turned a PR disaster into a cultural landmine. And within Disney, one sentiment echoed louder than all the rest. We can't control her. And now we can't control the narrative. This was no longer just a fallen fairy tale. It was a brand war, a geopolitical flashpoint, and the final nail in the coffin of a movie that had once been destined to redefine a generation. If the Free Palestine tweet was the spark that set the fuse, then what came next was the explosion. Because once the backlash reached a boiling point, the knives came out. Behind closed doors, in press junkets, on Twitter, even in family group chats, allegedly, everyone was asking the same question: who's to blame? And the first blow didn't come from a tabloid, a co-star, or a critic. It came from someone shockingly close to the production. Enter Jonah Platt. Name ring a bell? It should. Broadway veteran, occasional actor, and, more importantly, the brother of Ben Platt, who has long-standing ties with Disney producer Mark Platt. Yep, the same Mark Platt behind Snow White. So when Jonah decided to post a cryptic, pointed takedown aimed squarely at Rachel Zegler, eyebrows shot up. He didn't mention her by name, but he didn't have to. In a now infamous X, formerly Twitter, thread, Jonah criticized actors who think they're smarter than the writers, directors, and visionaries behind a project. He slammed public tantrums disguised as empowerment and warned young stars not to trash the legacy you were hired to represent. The subtext? Screaming. The timing? Impossible to ignore. The reaction? Nuclear. Fans and industry insiders instantly made the connection. Jonah was taking a direct shot at Zegler. And with his proximity to the Platt family, the very heart of the Snow White reboot's production team, his words felt less like personal opinion and more like a message from the inside. But that was just the tip of the iceberg, because after Jonah's post, it was like the floodgates opened. Suddenly, people within the production started talking. Anonymously, indirectly, subtly. But the message was clear. This wasn't just Rachel's fault, and it wasn't just Disney's either. It was everyone. Let's break down the internal blame game that exploded behind the scenes. 1. The cast versus Rachel. Some co-stars allegedly grew frustrated with Zegler early in the production. Whispers swirled that she was difficult to direct, frequently clashed with the script team, and at times pushed for rewrites or tone shifts that didn't align with the original vision. One insider said, she thought she was making Fleabag. The studio thought they were making Cinderella. The result? A tonal tug-of-war. And by the time filming wrapped, no one was sure what kind of movie they'd actually made. 2. Rachel versus Disney executives. According to leaks, Rachel Zegler had several disagreements with Disney executives, especially over how the film was being marketed. She allegedly wanted the messaging to focus on female empowerment and independence. Disney, on the other hand, wanted to lean on nostalgia, classic iconography, and family-friendly messaging. That led to a marketing campaign with whiplash. One day, Rachel is calling the original weird and mocking Prince Charming. The next, Disney is releasing soft-focus trailers filled with chirping birds and magic mirrors. The audiences? Confused. The critics? Divided. The fans? Furious. 3. Executives versus producers. Sources say that Disney's own executive team was fractured over the film's direction. Some wanted a faithful remake, closer to the original 1937 classic. Others wanted a radical reinvention, a Gen Z feminist rebrand that would set the tone for a new generation of Disney films. Mark Platt, as producer, was allegedly stuck in the middle. trying to appease both sides while juggling a fiery lead actress and a ballooning budget. And when things started falling apart, fingers were pointed in every direction. One anonymous production assistant spilled to a gossip blog. By the end, the vibe was total chaos. The left hand didn't know what the right was doing. Everyone blamed everyone else. It was a mess. 4. Sabotage theories begin to brew. Then came the most shocking theory of all. The whisper that someone was actively sabotaging the film from within. Some believed it was a strategic takedown of Rachel Zegler, designed to make her unhireable for future Disney projects. Others claimed Zegler herself was trying to distance herself from the film, and tanking its reception was intentional, a way to break free from the studio system and pivot towards serious political work. And then there were the conspiracy theorists, who believed the entire movie had been doomed by design. A test balloon to see how far audiences would accept Disney's new era storytelling before the company made broader changes to its content pipeline. Wild. Maybe. But the industry insiders weren't ruling anything out. What we were left with was a narrative imploding from every direction. An actress who couldn't stop stepping on rakes in the press. A studio that couldn't decide if it wanted revolution or tradition. A production team caught between legacy and reinvention. And a family member of a major player, publicly criticizing the lead star in a move that felt personal. Snow White was never meant to be a cultural battleground. It was supposed to be Disney's return to magic. But instead, it became a Hollywood horror story. And in that finger-pointing frenzy, the fairy tale crumbled. While Rachel Zegler ignited a media inferno with every comment, interview, and tweet, another powerful figure in the Snow White reboot was dead silent. No clapbacks, no hot takes, no public fallout, just silence. But don't mistake silence for absence. Because while Rachel was the face of the storm, Gal Gadot was the eye of it. Unmoving, unshaken, watching. And now, that silence is speaking volumes. Let's back up. When Disney cast Gal Gadot as the evil queen in Snow White, it felt like a strategic slam dunk. She was fresh off Wonder Woman, box office royalty, with international appeal and a clean, polished image. She played warriors, spies, legends. Now she would play the fairest one of all, or at least the one desperate to be. But somewhere between casting and chaos, Gal vanished from the conversation. While Rachel Zegler dominated headlines for controversial comments about the original film, Prince Charming, and feminism, Gal remained eerily absent from the firestorm. And that absence? It wasn't accidental. 1. The calculated distance. Behind the scenes, sources say Gal was hyper-aware of the minefield surrounding the Snow White reboot. Insiders claim she instructed her team to limit interviews, avoid hot-button topics, and decline joint appearances once the backlash started gaining momentum. When Rachel's comments began to go viral, Gal allegedly pulled back even further. No posts, no press push, not even a quote of solidarity. One source put it bluntly, Gal read the room and got out before it exploded. She wasn't going to be tied to a sinking ship, and she certainly wasn't going down with it. But what really made things complicated was what Gal wasn't saying. 2. The political elephant in the room. Because while Rachel Zegler was under fire for her Free Palestine tweet, Gal Gadot was already a long-standing lightning rod in the Israel-Palestine discourse. As an outspoken supporter of the Israeli military and national identity, Gadot has previously made headlines for posting about Israeli defense forces and advocating for Israel during periods of armed conflict. In Hollywood's increasingly charged political climate, this alone was enough to put her under scrutiny. So when Rachel posted Free Palestine on social media, fans didn't just see a political statement. They saw a direct contrast between the two leads of Disney's biggest live-action fairy tale. And while Rachel got slammed by critics, conservative media, and even some studio insiders, Gal said nothing. No tweet, no comment, not even a vague, "Let's focus on unity and peace." She stayed off-grid entirely. And to some, that silence was damning. 3. Is Gal Gadot next? Now, let's ask the question quietly circulating in Hollywood. Is Disney looking at Gal next? Because in the fallout of the Snow White mess, every player is under the microscope. Gal may have escaped the initial fire, But her political history, combined with her vanishing act, has not gone unnoticed. Some believe Disney insiders are already debating whether to distance themselves from her as well, especially if global audiences begin connecting her past statements to the cultural backlash surrounding the film. Others argue that Gal is being protected, that her relationship with top executives, box office track record, and global fanbase are enough to shield her from the kind of scrutiny Rachel faced. But here's where it gets murky. You have two actresses on opposite ends of the political spectrum, both starring in a film that's supposed to be about magic, wonder, and childhood nostalgia. Yet the film is now caught in the crossfire of one of the most divisive geopolitical conversations of our time. And the optics? Not good. 4. Hollywood's Cold War begins. As the Snow White situation continues to unravel, Gal's silence feels less like a PR strategy and more like a preemptive defense. She knows what happens when the internet turns. She's seen it. She's lived it. And now, she's watching it consume her co-star. Which raises a bigger, more terrifying question for Disney. What happens when both leads of your $240 million movie become political liabilities? One actress, too outspoken, the other too quiet. Both deeply polarizing for very different reasons. It's the kind of brand nightmare you can't buy your way out of. And no amount of CGI dwarves or castle backdrops can make this story go away. In the end, Gal Gadot may not have thrown gasoline on the fire, but she didn't grab a bucket of water either. She stood in the ashes, in heels and full costume, and said nothing. And in today's world, that silence might be louder than a scream. It started with a reboot, a live-action remake of a beloved childhood fairy tale. Big names, big budget, big expectations. But the fallout? It revealed something deeper, darker, more disruptive than anyone expected. Because Snow White isn't just a flop. It's a flashpoint, a symbol, a mirror held up to an industry that doesn't know who it's trying to be anymore. This isn't just about Rachel Zegler. It's not just about Gal Gadot. It's not even just about Disney. This is Hollywood's identity crisis. And it's getting ugly. Once upon a brand. Once upon a time, Hollywood had a clear formula. Big stars, tight scripts, universal themes, and most importantly, mass appeal. Studios weren't interested in dividing audiences. They wanted everyone. From soccer moms in Iowa to college students in New York. From nostalgic boomers to Gen Z TikTokers. And no one mastered that formula better than Disney. For decades, Disney was the cultural gold standard. Magic, morality, and marketability all in one sparkling package. But somewhere along the way, that formula broke. And instead of fixing it, Hollywood tried to reinvent it. 2. The rise of the message movie. As social media exploded and generational politics shifted, a new trend took hold. Movies stopped just telling stories and started making statements. Representation, activism, inclusivity. These weren't just behind-the-scenes goals. They became front-and-center headlines. Characters were rewritten, dialogue restructured, plots reshaped, not always for better storytelling, but to signal values. Now, let's be clear, representation matters. Progress matters. But for many moviegoers, especially families looking for a magical escape, something fell off. The fairy tales they grew up with weren't just being modernized. They were being deconstructed, critiqued, rejected, rebuilt, and audiences started asking, why are you lecturing me during a kid's movie? 3. Snow White, a case study in disconnect. Enter Snow White, the perfect storm of nostalgia and new messaging. The original 1937 film? A simple tale of innocence, jealousy, and true love's kiss. The reboot? A gender-political thesis paper. No prince, no romance. The princess doesn't want saving. She wants to lead. And the dwarves? Replaced, renamed, rebranded. And then there were the interviews. Rachel Zegler calling the original story weird, saying Snow White doesn't need man, that the movie would be about leadership, not love. Cue backlash. Cue think pieces. Cue audience rejection. For Disney, it wasn't just a marketing disaster. It was a brand implosion. Because here's the truth. People don't go to Snow White for social commentary. They go for magic, wonder, escape. And Disney had forgotten that. 4. The pivot heard round the industry. As the Snow White drama unraveled in real time, Disney's tone started to shift. Behind closed doors, executives panicked. Stockholders got antsy. Public trust began to erode. And then, almost quietly, Disney's messaging changed. Suddenly, they weren't talking about challenging outdated narratives. They weren't touting progressivism in press releases. Instead, they began repeating a new mantra. We want to entertain, not send messages. CEO Bob Iger, once vocal about Disney's social role, now urging moderation. Executives pushing back against activist storytelling. Studios quietly shelving projects seen as too divisive. It wasn't a retreat. It was a rebrand, a signal to audiences. We hear you. We remember who we are. But here's the catch. The damage might already be done. 5. The Great Divide. Hollywood is now split. One side says, art should challenge, provoke, and reflect the times. The other side says, movies are for escape. Stop preaching. Start entertaining. Both sides have a point, but the middle ground is vanishing. Audiences are no longer united by shared cinematic experiences. They're fractured by politics, platforms, and perspective. What used to be a trip to the movies is now a cultural referendum, and Snow White, a film meant for children, became the battleground. 6. What comes next? Will Disney's pivot stick? Will other studios follow? Or are we entering a new era where every film is a frontline in the culture war? Hollywood faces a brutal choice. Double down on messaging and risk alienating half the audience. Or return to classic storytelling and risk accusations of regression. There's no easy answer. No magic mirror to show the perfect path forward. But what's clear is this. Snow White was more than a reboot gone wrong. It was a reckoning, a wake-up call, a warning. Because if the industry keeps forgetting why people fell in love with movies in the first place, there won't be a happy ending for anyone. The dust has settled. The press tour has ended. The premiere glitz? Forgotten. And what remains is a crater. A financial black hole where a billion-dollar franchise was meant to bloom. Because Disney's Snow White isn't just underperforming. It's a catastrophe. Let's talk about the numbers. Let's talk about the damage. And let's ask the one question no one in Hollywood wants to hear. Is the magic gone for good? 1. The numbers don't lie. They scream. Projected to be a global juggernaut, Snow White had everything on paper. A $240 million production budget. Another $100 million plus in marketing. Decades of brand equity. Built-in international appeal. Disney expected Frozen-level money. What they got? A financial bloodbath. Opening weekend came and went with a whimper. Theaters sat half empty. Critics were lukewarm. Audience scores? Brutal. And then came the headlines. Disney's Snow White. One of the studio's worst openings in a decade. Reboot reeks of disaster. Zegler's comments come back to haunt Disney. Week 2 saw an unprecedented drop-off. Merchandise collected dust. International markets shrugged. Streaming projections were no better. By the third week, analysts stopped asking how much profit Disney would make and started calculating how much they'd lose. 2. Zegler's team breaks the silence. As the narrative spiraled, one voice remained eerily quiet. Rachel Zegler, the actress once billed as Disney's next megastar, disappeared from the spotlight. No new press appearances. No red carpet glamour. No TikTok dances or cheeky tweets. But behind the scenes, her team was moving. And when the dam finally broke, the defense was pointed and revealing. Rachel was following studio direction. Every statement, every talking point, every tone was coached, encouraged, approved. Suddenly, the interviews that had gone viral for all the wrong reasons. Her critiques of the original story. Her dismissal of Prince Charming. Her leadership over love rhetoric were now being framed as studio-sanctioned. It was no longer just her voice. It was Disney's script. And Rachel? She was just the one reading it aloud. 3. The blame game reaches its peak. But Disney wasn't standing still either. Internally, executives were livid. Insiders described unprecedented post-release audits, emergency marketing meetings, late-night crisis calls. And when reporters asked Disney reps about Zegler's statements, the tone had shifted. We don't condone the messaging that overshadowed the film. Snow White was always meant to be empowering, not divisive. Translation: throw her under the pumpkin-shaped bus. The whispers turned into roars. Was Zegler a scapegoat, or did she truly go off script? Was the studio angry because she said the wrong things, or because she said the quiet parts out loud? Sources claim legal teams were brought in to review contractual alignment with public image expectations, which is code for, did she violate her agreement by becoming a liability? But others argue Zegler had no protection, no veteran PR strategy, no strong media handler, just a young actress thrown into a political maelstrom, instructed to be modern, bold, feminist, only to be left alone when it backfired. 4. A legacy in crisis. It's not just about Snow White. It's about what Snow White was meant to be. The launchpad of a new Disney princess era. A legacy reboot. A signal to the world that Disney could still set the standard. Instead, the brand is bruised. The message is muddled. And the box office is a graveyard. More than that, it's a trust issue. Parents aren't sure what messages their kids will absorb. Fans aren't sure if Disney respects its classics. And shareholders aren't sure if leadership even has a plan. All of this has turned one simple reboot into an existential crisis. 5. The Ghost of Walt. Let's get philosophical. Walt Disney once said, "I do not make films primarily for children. I make them for the child in all of us." But today, Disney feels split between audiences. The nostalgic child and the adult activist, trying to please both and satisfying neither. So, now the company stands at a fork in the road. Double down on ideology and keep reshaping the canon, or return to storytelling roots and risk being called outdated? Either way, the brand is no longer bulletproof. Snow White has fractured the fairy tale, and it may take years, if ever, for that wound to heal. 6. So what happens now? Will Rachel Zegler bounce back with a redemption arc? Will Disney shelve other remakes quietly? Will audiences ever trust the brand again? Rumors are already swirling that future live-action projects are being reevaluated, that test audiences are being surveyed like never before, that casting decisions will now come with muzzle clauses. The machine is grinding. The empire is recalibrating. But the cultural wound is deep, because once the audience begins to feel manipulated instead of enchanted, the spell breaks. And now, with billions at stake, reputations in tatters, and a storybook bleeding ink, we're left with one haunting question. Can Disney recover? Or has the magic finally run out?